Honestly, I don't even know what to say this time. You guys are geniuses. In the last video, where we transferred the Minecraft world from an old version to a new one in Bedrock Edition, someone in the comments suggests doing the same thing, but this time using the Xbox 360 edition. Back in 2011, when Minecraft was rapidly gaining popularity, Microsoft approached Mojang with an offer. They put a pretty hefty sum of money on the table, one that Nudge just couldn't refuse. This was before Microsoft bought Mojang. At that time, they wanted a unique version of Minecraft specifically for their Xbox 360 console. And what's more important, they insisted on making it a time exclusive for Xbox. The details of the deal were never made public, but it's safe to say that money involved was huge, especially considering that Nudge had always said he wouldn't port Minecraft to consoles because of their closed type of platform. In the end, it was 50 by 50 situation. Nudge didn't have to handle the port himself. It was done by the Scottish studio 4G Studios. They were a pretty experienced team, having already made a name for themselves with the ports of games like The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion and Perfect Dark HD. I will also point out that the world of Minecraft for Xbox 360 was completely limited in all aspects. The size of the world was 864 by 864 blocks. It is impossible to increase the size of the world. This is due to the hardware limitation of the console. As always, we're starting with the very first version as our baseline. I managed to find version 0.66.0062.0, which will serve as the foundation. From here, we'll be applying updates one by one, but we'll get into that later in the video. The game's menu actually looks pretty nice. Funny enough, console edition of Minecraft had changing main menu panorama depending on the version, something that only came to Java Edition 6 years later in version 1.13. As for the settings, well, they weren't exactly as precise as in Java Edition. You had basic options like music, sounds, gamma, sensitivity, split screen support. Yep, you could instantly play local co-op on the same console, and a few others. Oh, and the credits. Absolutely butchered. I swear, it looks like the design was thrown together in 2 minutes. When creating a world, the options are very limited. You can only choose the world name, seed, and difficulty. And that's it. No other settings. Unfortunately, this version doesn't have creative mode yet, so if I wanted to explore, I actually had to gather resources like in survival. I spawned on a tiny island with some small mountains to my right, so I decided to sail the opposite direction. Turns out my spawn point was really close to the edge of the world. In Java Edition you can see the world border, but here it's the exact opposite. The border is completely invisible, and no matter which way you go, you always find yourself surrounded by an endless identical ocean in all 4 directions. Since this version doesn't let you manually set the time of the day, I had to go looking for a ship. And to my surprise, when I hit a ship, it dropped wool instantly, instead of needing to be sheared. Turns out this version was based on Java Beta, so a lot of mechanics from that era made their way here. Even wolves were already aggressively hunting sheep, though their animation looked super weird back then. But what surprised me the most? Cows with horns. And no, I don't mean the little stubs they have today. I'm talking about big horns growing straight from the top of their heads, instead of sticking out from the sides like they do now. It looks so bizarre. The weirdness didn't stop there. While exploring, I noticed something odd. What looked like incorrect biome blending. At biome borders, the grass color didn't transition smoothly. One side was brighter, while the other was darker. Then came the TU5 update. A quick note, on Xbox 360, updates weren't numbered like we're used to. Instead, they used a mix of letters and numbers. TU stands for Title Update, and the number represents the version. Over 7 years of development, they released 75 updates, but they didn't exactly follow the standard Minecraft update cycle. As soon as I launched this version, the game immediately wanted to show off everything new. The things that caught my attention the most? Strongholds, villages, rivers, and swamps. This version finally introduced the ability to switch between game modes. For some reason I can't explain. I respawned back on my starting island, my entire inventory was wiped, and out of nowhere it was suddenly night. Unfortunately, there was still no way to manually set the time, so I figured the easiest way to skip the night was just to sleep. I grabbed a bed from the creative menu, placed it down, went to sleep, and woke up right next to Mr. the Zombie. Okay, weird, but whatever. I moved a bit further away, placed the bed again, and tried sleeping. This time, another zombie appeared. I tried one more time, and now it was Skeleton. I have no idea if this was a bug, but I do remember that in Java Edition, Notch once added an Easter egg where sometimes, while sleeping, monsters would spawn next to your bed, like a nightmare. But the key word here is sometimes, not every single time. And yeah, I never managed to sleep through the night. Every attempt just spawned more monsters. In the end, I had no choice but just sit there and wait for morning. The first thing I noticed was that my tiny island had been split in half. One side was the winter biome, the other was temperate. Ice had formed in the water, which immediately fell off to me. On the opposite side, near the world border, I found a desert biome, but something was weird. The terrain looked like it had been cut off, as if in the previous version the world had ended there, but now suddenly the world had expanded slightly. As far as I know though, the world size never changed, so what happened here? What surprised me the most was that the small mountain to the right of my island had suddenly started getting covered in snow. Ice blocks also began forming along the shores, almost as if the water was gradually freezing, even though everything had been fine before. The weird biome blending was still happening, and just past those mountains, I spotted two trees. At first I thought they were jungle trees, but when I got closer, I realized that they were actually swamp trees. The strange part, there was no swamp biome anywhere nearby. The actual swamp was about 100 blocks away, sitting right in the middle of the ocean. Next was TU7. Like all other versions, this update didn't have an official name. Right away, the game greeted me with the full changelog. The biggest addition, Nether Fortress and the mushroom biome. Likely this time, I was actually able to sleep through the night. Not a single monster tried to ruin my rest. As I was flying past an island, I caught a glimpse of a really beautiful spot out of the corner of my eye. For some reason, it reminded me of the resource pack selection icon. All it was missing was a peak. This world kept surprising me though. Once again, the forest biome had mixed with mountains, creating a strange blend of dark and bright grass. Flying further on newly generated terrain, I finally found a swamp biome. The water was murky, lily pads floated on the surface, but of course, there was an issue. The biome was awkwardly merged with the plains biome, making the transition look completely unnatural. About 100 blocks away from the swamp, I stumbled upon a mushroom island, or, well, more like mushroom hills. Now that's some luck. The update had just added this biome and it actually appeared in my world, though for some reason there was no mushroom cows. They just didn't spawn. Since this update also added Nether Fortress, I figured why not try to find one. So I built a Nether portal, lit it up. By the way, flint and steel sounds in this version are super weird. What's greeting me on the other side? Pure darkness. The nether was incredibly dim, and since night vision potion didn't exist in this version yet, I had no way to fix it. But, as with everything in this edition, the nether had limits. Its size was only 288 by 288 blocks. In the overworld, invisible barriers stop you from going further, but in the nether, you trapped inside a solid bedrock box. And yeah, it looks about as bad as it sounds. As for the fortress, I never found one. Turns out, it just didn't generate in my tiny nether. And yeah, this happened a lot back then. At this point, there was nothing I could do about it. This update also added the end, but there was no way to actually enter it since it was unfinished. I tried placing a portal frame and inserting Eyes of Ender, but nothing happened. Completely useless. Then came TU10, which finally made the end fully accessible. But of course, there was a catch. In my world, no stronghold had generated, meaning I had no way of finding a natural spawn and portal. Likely the portal I had built in the previous version actually worked. I was finally able to place Eyes of Ender into the frame and activate it. The end, just like the nether, was dark and heavily limited. This time its size was only 240 by 240 blocks. The main island was tiny, and there weren't even that many obsidian towers. Then I had an idea. What if I activated the end portal, saved the world, and then loaded in the previous version, where portals couldn't be activated? So I did all the steps, loaded up my world in the older version, and guess what happened? The entire world regenerated from scratch. The seed stayed the same, but everything I had built or explored was completely wiped. Turns out, you can't transfer a world from a newer version to an older one, because every time you try, it just recreates the terrain from scratch, erasing all previous progress. Meanwhile, in this version, my island had finally gone back to normal. The winter grass disappeared, the sharp biome border was gone, the ice had melted, and to my surprise, a mushroom cow had finally spawned near the mushroom island. After that, I decided to test the stable TU19 version. It didn't introduce any new world generation features, but finally, they added an option to disable the day-night cycle. What's funny is that even though terrain generation wasn't supposed to change, my island changed again. It was almost like my oak tree had turned into a spruce tree, and on the far end of the world, a new biome had started forming. Judging by the grass color, it definitely wasn't there before. Other than that, nothing too interesting happened with my world. Next up, TU29. At this point, I decided to skip the filler updates. You know, the ones that barely add anything new besides paid DLCs. First things first, I was finally able to disable the weather. No more rain, just clear skies all the time. Another new feature was the Reset Nether option. Since players often struggle to find Nether Fortress, this option gave them a fresh chance. So, of course, I immediately rushed into the Nether, and to my surprise, a fortress had generated right next to my portal. Not only that, but it was huge, it stretched across almost the entire dimension. This update also introduced night vision potions, which made it way easier to see underwater. But then I ran into a problem. My previously generated world could no longer create new biomes or terrain. The game simply wasn't designed to allow it. So, if you started your world in an older version, don't expect smooth transition into new terrain in newer version. You'll just get brutally cut off chunks, where mountains, islands and biomes suddenly end. And in my case, my world got even worse. The terrain had been sliced up so much that it now looked like a giant square island surrounded by ocean. But hey, at least my oak tree turned back into oak tree. The spruce tree vanished as if it had never been there. Next up was TU39. This update introduced a ton of new settings and, of course, the official minigames that so many players loved. Though at this point the only one available was Hunger Games. When I loaded into my world, the first thing I noticed was my Nether portal. I have no idea what happened, but somehow the portal frame had rotated 90 degrees. Weirdly enough, but it was still fully functional and everything in the Nether was completely normal. Something else I found interesting. With every new version, the snow near my island kept disappearing. The snowy taiga biome was slowly turning into a regular forest. But on the opposite side, the exact opposite was happening. The ocean started freezing and random ice blocks began appearing out of nowhere. It looked suspicious, especially since they only appeared on the one side of the world border, specifically near the desert as I loaded in more chunks. Then came TU49, the update that added end cities. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. How in the world did they even implement that? This update also introduced another interesting setting, Reset the End, just like the Nether reset option. So I jumped into newly updated End, and at first glance nothing had changed. The Ender Dragon was still flying around, a few extra towers had appeared, but that was about it. I wanted to fly toward the outer End Islands, but the invisible border was still blocking me. Turns out you had to defeat the Ender Dragon first, only then would the portal to the outer End Islands appear, just like in the Java edition. But here's the catch, the outer island was also limited. If you were lucky, an End City would spawn. If you were really lucky, you might even get an End Ship with Elytras. But honestly, in the world this small, Elytra doesn't seem all that useful. The final update for this console was TU75. Yep, I decided to skip TU59 and TU69, since they didn't change anything about the world generation. TU75 marked the end of the development and warped up the update Aquatic. I was really hoping the devs had figured out a way to update old chunks properly, but unfortunately my world just got even worse. It's hard to notice in the video, but grass blocks were completely mixed up, almost like the game had randomly shuffled grass colors from different biomes and dumped them all in one place. This was especially obvious in swamp biomes. The water became extremely weird. Just like the grass blocks, water colors from different biomes got mixed together in completely random ways. For example, swamp water appeared in places where there was never swamp before. Near my starting island, the water suddenly turned into Mushroom Island water, even though that biome was never there. This issue was present everywhere, and to make things worse, the update didn't add anything new to my existing world. Honestly, it was pretty disappointing. So in the end, I decided to create a brand new world in the same version to see what it was actually supposed to look like. Of course, I used the original seed from my first world. The difference was immediately noticeable. New biomes had finally appeared, the ocean was full of color, even Ice Spikes biome had generated. That old swamp from my original world blended perfectly with the new terrain. I even found the village a pretty big one, too, though it just so happened to spawn right on the world border. But what shocked me the most, an ocean monument had spawned right in the middle of the ocean. So what did I learn? Trying to carry a world from the oldest version to the newest one doesn't just mess up the terrain, it also messes up the player. Why? Because once you fully load your world in an older version, it's impossible for new biomes or structures to generate later on. And let's be honest, loading the entire map in such a small world isn't hard at all. Of course, a lot of these problems come down to console limitations, but it's still frustrating to realize that if you want the newest content, you're forced to start a brand new world. What's next? Now I'm going to try something different. Transferring a Bedrock world from a newer version to an older one. And good news, it's actually possible. While you wait for the next video, check out these ones, they're just as interesting. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, smash that like button and hit the notification bell. See you soon, because we're discovering Minecraft in a whole new way.